Have you ever witnessed someone say if you don't like it, leave and everyone left? What was the story? A former industrial job I used to have said that during an all hands meeting. We were understaffed, underpaid, and overworked, and everyone knew it. Instead of the 2:1 ratio of 2 machines to 1 operator for safety reasons, we'd have 4, 6, 8. Because people were getting paid less than most retail jobs to bust their asses in some of the most disgusting work I've ever done. You'd come home covered in moldy coolant, metal shavings, and stink. Machines started breaking down because they'd never shut them down to perform maintenance on them, so we'd often have massive problems, which, of course, meant even more overtime to make up for the broken machines, and people started quitting. Management's response was to tell us that they expected us to work harder because they couldn't get more help in. One of my co-workers, who generally gave no fricks, asked, in front of everyone in that room, why they didn't try raising the poor wages and see if they could entice people that way. The response was, we're not having that conversation right now. If you don't like it, you can quit. Oh, buddy, was that the wrong thing to say? As soon as word got out to the other shifts, what can only be called a freaking exodus began. We lost half of each shift within the week. I stuck around for a few more weeks until I had a conflict with my schooling at the time, since one of my classes got out about 30 minutes before my shift, 30 minutes away. So I warned them in advance that I might be a few minutes late one day a week, maybe, and got told that I needed to decide what was more important, my school or my job. So I quit and giggled my butt off at the sign in the HR office that said we had an almost 80% turnover rate. I never did find out what happened to that hellhole, but I can't imagine anything good with losing that many people. The poor HR rep seemed like she was just so freaking done with everything, and seemed so very apologetic as she took my badge. I never understood that what's more important, school or the job thing. Seriously, if job was super important to you, you wouldn't be studying. Of course everyone will choose school over their job. Every year the military has this event they host named the Warrior Games. It's like the Olympics for men and women who were injured while serving. I'm a decent cyclist, so I was selected to represent the Marine Corps team in that event. I'm not sure where they hold the event these days, but the year I was selected they flew us out to Colorado Springs. When I got there I quickly realized that 99% of the Marines competing was still active duty. I had retired a few years prior, so it was weird being around Marines again. Almost immediately after arriving, the senior leaders and officers in charge began demanding that I get my hair cut and to shave my beard. At first I laughed it off and thought they were joking. Turns out they were quite serious. The lady who was in charge of the Marine team was a major, and she took me off to the side and ordered me to get a haircut. I reminded her that I had retired a few years prior and was no longer required to abide by active military grooming standards. Then a light bulb went off in her head, and with a smirk she said, well, you either get a haircut or you can go home. Your choice. So I smirked back and said, guess I'm flying home. They had already purchased our airplane tickets home, so all I did was call Delta, explain what happened, and the lady on the other end transferred my ticket to a flight home the next day. I had taken a few weeks off work to attend this event, so I just went back home and enjoyed my time off with my hair and beard. When I was a kid I stayed at a friend's house for the weekend. My friend's mother was one of those parents who, at the dinner table, required their kids to eat everything on their plate come heck or high water. I had been served way too much food and said that I can't eat it all. The mother said to me, you can either finish your food or leave the table. I promptly left the table. This totally blew the minds of my friend and his siblings. It had never occurred to them that leaving the table was actually a viable option. When my mother picked me up the next day, my friend's mother told her what had happened and said I was the rudest little boy. I think my mother was actually quite proud of me. My boss said, don't like it? Try finding a job like this one with better pay and benefits. So I Googled it, and now I just had my 14th year anniversary at the new job. My great grandmother is notorious for being a mean old bee. It was Thanksgiving at her house, and much of the extended family were there. She started harping on my mom's cousin for something, like she always does, and my mom's cousin was like, Grandma, can't we just have a nice dinner for once? And great grandma was like, if you don't like it, leave. And every last cousin, aunt, uncle, and all of their food disappeared to my aunt's house. LOL. I want to know what happened after this. LOL. I had an insufferable supervisor once and we'd have these 15-minute pre-shift meetings. Dude would just stand in there and lord over everybody for the duration and talk about how bad we were doing. The phrase "we suck" was one of his favorites. Finally one day, he's really on one and summons the testicular fortitude to say if you don't like it, there's the door. His second in command got up, said "F this" and walked out. He stood there, stunned for about 5 seconds and then ran out the door after him. He later ended up having some mental instability and quitting. The second in command is now the supervisor. I survived all of these meetings by default, assuming he wasn't talking to me. Summons the testicular fortitude. I am stealing this line for future use. It must have been easy for him to have that much testicular fortitude considering he sounds like a massive testicle himself. My husband worked at a really toxic job for a while. As staff got fired or quit, they weren't replaced to cut costs, and instead the remaining 2 employees were worked to death. Finally, the owner, who was a crappy boss and terrible businessman, called a meeting with the 2 to try to force an attitude adjustment. The employees tried to be constructive and talk about things they saw that needed to be improved upon to make things work better, and of course this egotistical butthole owner wouldn't have it. He told them if they couldn't handle the expectations that they were free to leave, so they did. Both of them left immediately and never set foot in the store again. I don't think the owner was expecting that at all. He expected them to grovel and beg to keep their jobs and thank him for the opportunity to work 70-hour weeks under his tyrannical rule. My husband called me after that meeting and was so upset he couldn't hardly tell me what happened. He was terrified. He was so sure I would be angry at him for quitting his job when we really weren't in a position that I could support us. I wasn't mad at all. I was so proud of him for not taking the crap that was being doled out to him and doing what is best for his mental health. He's a dang good man and deserves better. You're a good wife. He's a lucky guy to have that kind of support. Worked at Thai restaurant. Owner's daughter who was manager left town for a couple weeks and we realized once she left that she was stealing our tips, tipping us out way less than herself for over a year if working there with her. When she got back we confronted her at the end of the night during her shift since she refused to meet with us in an official group meeting. The 4 of us, servers, called her out and she said if you don't like it then get out or sue me. We were all 18-20 years old and didn't really know what to do, so 3 of us quit on the spot in that moment and walked out the door. I'll never forget the look on her face. Sad to hear that. Thai people are usually nice and very hospitable. Not exactly, but my sister had a habit of picking fights with people, and when it wasn't going her way, she'd tell them she was removing them from her life. She's done it to boyfriends, longtime friends, sorority sisters. She did it to me twice. The first time, I rolled my eyes because she's younger than me. After the second time my sister told me I'm removing you from my life. You're toxic, and unfriended me and told family I was toxic. In reality, I wasn't letting her be toxic, selfish, and under the influence of whatever she was on with to me, my spouse, or my kids, so she decided it was a good idea to threaten us. I said okay, fine. Per her usual routine, after a few weeks she came around and wanted to pretend she never said the things she said. I didn't respond. She claimed it all was a joke and she had a right to be in my kids' lives. I haven't spoken to her in 2 years. I honestly do not miss her drama, and it was the best decision for my family. It highlighted how bad the generational dysfunction was in my family and how it was expected to just overlook bad behavior and people please for everyone else's comfort. I realized that I didn't want my kids to repeat that cycle. I vowed to always put my kids first. I'm not popular in my family right now, but I've never been happier, and this was the first year I got to enjoy holidays without having panic attacks or dread. When someone walks out of your life, let them. I thought you were talking about a child-aged sister until you mentioned your kids. Back in the mid-90s, a co-worker was under a great deal of stress. He was performing a low-skill role in a high-skill industry during a tremendous crunch that was very important to the company. Entry-level stuff. More a job that's a stepping stone than a career. Despite that, he was an integral member of the team with institutional knowledge background that couldn't be replaced overnight. Actually, it couldn't be replaced at all. During a team meeting to go over status, progress, etc., He asked our boss for some help as he was overwhelmed and simply couldn't keep up anymore. Boss said, "If you can't handle it, there's the door." Dude just stood up and, without a single word, he walked right out. Boss ended up having to do his job until completion of the initiative. Probably bitched and complained about how hard it is to find good help these days after. My lecturer wanted us to have an extra class, online, after the exams because we had missed a lesson during the semester. We asked him if he could at least move it to the afternoon, but he insisted it be at 9 AM. So everyone logged into classroom but only 2 people were answering his questions. He then decided to take the register and everyone was present. Then he said, "I'm not forcing anyone to be here. If you don't want to participate in the lesson, go." Everyone logged out immediately except me because I had gone to the bathroom. When I came back, I found him calling for my name. He later logged out and sent me the PPT of the lesson. I feel sorry for him. When I worked third shift at Walmart, the management tried to change a shirt policy overnight. They all of a sudden decided that we had to wear blue collared shirts and not blue t-shirts anymore. One of the managers named Jackie, who was a total B, came up to my 2 friends and myself and told us we had to either go buy new shirts right then or go home. We left. Frozen Dairy didn't get done that night, and we got to go home and play Destiny all night. Next day they never said another word about our shirts. Frick Walmart, by the way. Unless you're a WoW raider, this probably doesn't apply, but I've been in a number of raid formations, especially back in the day, where the raid leader announces some wonky loot rules that disproportionately benefit himself close friends, and would then say, "If you don't like it, leave." Yep, we left. My mother is well known for her Christmas, Easter, whatever tantrums. She threw a particularly good one when I was about 14 and yelled the infamous line. My uncle and aunt piled themselves, their daughter, and myself and about 5 of my siblings into their 4WD, and we all left to go to their place, picking up KFC for lunch on the way. Don't know what kind of Christmas my mother had, but ours was pretty good in the end. So glad we didn't get pulled over. We had a similar situation with my aunt back in the day, only said aunt was already being investigated by child services, and when my parents took my cousins home with us, it was about 4 hours away, and she didn't try to get them back immediately. DSS came a week later, found out we had the children and asked my parents if they'd adopt my cousins. They said yes, and now I have 2 sister cousins. I used to be the co-owner and station manager for a small online radio station. We were all digital, so I rarely met any of our staff in person, and we were online 24/7, so if I was awake I was pretty much always working. We had a dedicated team of assistant station managers, about 6 of them, in charge of various things, and we would have once weekly meetings with me, the ASMs, and the other co-owner. None of us were paid. This was strictly a volunteer gig. It cost the co-owner and I money to keep the station on the air, but it was a labor of love. At one point I began to get close to one of the ASMs and we started dating. The co-owner of the station got jealous and began to give him crap about his work, demanding that he redo graphics and coding over and over and over even when it was perfectly fine. He laid into the ASM at one of our weekly staff meetings and I lost it. I told him that he needed to stop his behavior or I was going to walk. "Fine," he said. "This is my station. If you don't like the way I run it, leave." I quit on the spot. So did half of the assistant station managers. Then a large number of the DJs. Within 2 years, the whole thing had to shut down because no one could work with my former co-owner, because he was a petty tyrant who had to have things his way and couldn't let people live their lives. I've never felt such petty glee as when I saw their off-the-air blog post. New management was hired and took over scheduling from me, who was covering for a now gone manager, without understanding any of the intricacies of scheduling. After 2 weeks we had an all-staff meeting to address grievances based on her incredibly poor method of scheduling, and she refused to back down, dropping the famous ultimatum. Out of a staff of 40 or so employees, I think maybe half a dozen stayed. I find it amusing there's a quarter dozen people complaining that you didn't say 6. If they don't like your choice of words, maybe they should just leave. I was the whistleblower at my workplace. I witnessed my manager mentally and physically abuse a 101-year-old woman. I worked in a care home. I raised the alarm, and staff above the manager didn't deal with things quick enough and over worry of a bad name. Press had gotten a hold of the story. They were trying to keep it quiet and were going to allow this manager back to work on a final warning. We were a small team, about 8 of us. When they told us that, all of us reached into our bags and threw our notices at them. It was all of us, or her. A week or so later and them paying her £15k, she was gone. Worst thing is, we were a charity care home. She basically got thousands and thousands of pounds for abusing a vulnerable elderly woman. I know she got away with it, but what you guys did was 100% the right thing, and very admirable. Well, I wasn't here for this one unfortunately, but my high school English class had this scenario. The senior AP English teacher was notorious in my graduating class for not really giving a dang about a lot of the students. From the way I was told, they were going over quizzes to which the teacher started going over some vague subjective response and how it was wrong. The students started arguing and the conversation came full circle to where the teacher started agreeing with the students. Once he realized this, he started backing off that answer and correcting students again, causing more frustration. This resulted in a student saying, "There's no point in learning this if we're wrong even if we were right at one point." Well, if there's any of you who don't find this valuable, you can stand up and leave the classroom. 2 students of 28 remained. I was absent cause I was sick, but what a sight it would have been. It's always when you're not there that something exciting happens. Had a teacher nobody liked pull the old "if you don't want to behave, you can leave my classroom" on a classmate. The whole class got up and left. Things hadn't been going well in this class since he had started teaching us. The main problem was that he was a really bad teacher. Like, he seemed to have no knowledge on his own subject history, or at least was incredibly bad at transferring his knowledge. We didn't have any respect for him, and he tried to keep us in line by being extremely strict, but in an unfair way. Wouldn't let anyone ask questions anymore, because he could never answer them. Screamed at students if they quietly asked their neighbor for a pencil, that sort of stuff. I don't remember what my classmates did that angered the teacher, but it was something minor. We were all fed up with him, so when he told my classmate to just leave, we all did. Felt really rebellious and like I was part of a bigger plan or something. It was great. We got into trouble for it, but also got the teacher fired, so it was worth it. Had my first job as a massage therapist. My friend from school also got a job there. The business was taken over by this lady who decided to also hire her friend, who hadn't even graduated massage therapy school. The owner's friend would start sessions way earlier than necessary if the clients got there early, which meant that sometimes my friend and I would sometimes have to scramble to get ready for couples massages with her. For example, my friend was still commuting and was a few minutes away, and the owner's friend tried to start having the clients get ready. It was frustrating because we'd have no time to talk to the clients before the sessions like we were supposed to. One day I politely told her that my friend wasn't there yet, and she should wait to put the clients on the table until he was actually there so he could talk to his client. She got super mad and told the new owner I was being rude to her. Well, the new owner clearly got a different story and started texting me telling me I was in trouble. I didn't ever find out what the actual issue was directly from her, but I knew it was because of her friend because of how quickly it happened after I told her friend to wait to start that session. I tried to set up a meeting in person to talk about it, but she kept refusing and said we could talk about it over text. I decided I wasn't going to deal with that unprofessional behavior from a manager and walked in to tell her I quit. Turns out my friend also quit that day because of her friend's nonsense. The business owner was left with her unlicensed, uncertified friend, and a stand-in that was extremely unreliable, on a really full schedule. When I was in high school, I was part of a FRC robotics team. The coach decided that no one who missed a practice during the last week of the season would be allowed to attend the tournaments. Of course, the band class had a mandatory concert during one of the meetings. So when I brought up that I wouldn't skip the graded band concert, the coach gave the ultimatum. About a third of the team got up and left, including all the captains. Coach backed out of that really fast. At an off-campus college party, the host, a tenor voice major in the music department, started playing Wagner and Verdi operas full blast. When those attending asked him to play something else that they could all like, he said, "You all need to learn to like opera. If you won't give it a fair try, you can always just leave." And with that, everyone left. I like opera, but if everyone else is asking for a change at a party, then you better believe I would change it. Grade 8 language arts class. To preface this, I was never an aggressive student. Generally the teacher's pet, the person who, if a teacher was away for the day, would be tasked and their notes to the sub to be able to assist and give them directions. The time, 20 some odd years ago, shortly after the Columbine shooting. This context is critical to the story. Location, middle of nowhere Alberta, a small country school. So our regular teacher was out for the day and had left a note directing the sub to ask me if she had questions about what had been covered. Sub comes in, reads note and opens the teacher's weekly planner. Then begins writing our words for the weekly spelling test on the board. Except, she opened the wrong week. Instead of the current week, she had opened the prior week. At this point, being the goody two shoes that I was, and much to my classmates' dismay, although our teacher would have corrected us when she was back so it wouldn't have helped them, I raised my hand and politely informed her that I believed she had gotten the page wrong as we had previously covered this material. What happened next, I couldn't make up. She lost her crap. She started ranting about how teens in general and me specifically were a danger to her. How she didn't know who were her friends and her enemies in the class. We'd never had this sub before. How she had every right to fear for her life. She then capped it off by saying she was the teacher and if we wanted to think in her classroom, well, there was the door. We were welcome to leave. I was never a popular child, so I wasn't really expecting one of the popular kids, and my sometime bully, to stand up collectively with everyone else, pull me to my feet, and we all walked out. Now, I mentioned above that we attended a small country school. There was no place to go. So we just sat in the hallway until the principal came down to chew us out for not being in class. The sub was gone by the start of the next period and the principal taught the rest of our teachers' classes that day. The freaking bully was like, "No one talks like that to my victim." I'm kidding, but that's really cool of them. I work for a hoisting transport contracting company at a large refinery, and for the most part it's very relaxed. Basically, it's more cost effective to have more than enough people just in case something goes wrong, so a lot of the time we just sit around waiting for something to do. My foreman for some reason doesn't like this and thinks we all have it too easy, even though he is totally redundant and literally not needed at all here, and was telling one of the guys one day that maybe he needs to go to the yard, our HQ main office we are dispatched from and all our equipment is stored, and see what a real job is like. So he did. He called the office and transferred there permanently, and our foreman on site lost his freaking mind. He didn't even say anything about it for weeks, but we all knew what happened. One day I even asked if guy that left was on vacation or something. He just mumbled, "Yeah, something like that." Hoisted by his own petard. Okay, maybe not everyone left, but my mother-in-law got me involved into a charity. First I was a volunteer, then a secretary to the board, and back to volunteer again. Things started changing. People who got on the board were no longer true to the organization's mission and at times ethically challenged. That is, using high school volunteers for the charity in a political campaign, using artwork obtained through contests beyond scope of the contest rules without pay. Anyway, during one of the meetings, which was meant to be planning for a big annual event but was more like hazing to be honest, I asked myself, why the heck am I allowing anyone to treat me like whipping girl? So I openly asked the board members if this tone is the new standard of the organization's interactions with people volunteering their time and talents to them. The president told me I was being impertinent and rude, and if I could not stand the heat to get out of kitchen. To which I replied that I quit volunteering. He told me then I had to submit my resignation in writing in order for it to be acceptable. I sat down, scribbled my resignation on a notebook page and presented him with it. He told me he won't accept it because it was not submitted according to the bylaws. I told him he was incorrect and reminded him I wrote the bylaws. They were too cheap to hire a lawyer to write them, and they clearly state that volunteer resignations do not require board approval. And I left. I was too pee to drive home, so I went to a cafe across the street. Few minutes later, 2 other long-time volunteers and all the high school volunteers walked in. They all did quit effective immediately as well. The annual event did not take place. The board was sued by the entity it was supposed to be solely supporting for mismanagement and misappropriation of funds. The charity later involuntarily dissolved by the state due to reporting failures. Custodian was appointed who allocated the remaining funds. In hindsight, it was the right time to jump the ship. For me, best part was, the board let the insurance lapse. Guess who normally kept track of the renewals? So the legal expenses and part of the judgment went out of their own pockets. Talk about heat in the kitchen. Volunteer resignations do not require board approval. Good luck making an employee require employer approval to quit, much less a volunteer position. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.